Hey there, Battlefield community. Yes, that includes you two watching this video, by the way. Come sit down for a second. We need to have a bit of a chat. More specifically about the maps in Battlefield 6. And no, this isn't going to be some big old lecture akin to the one you'd get from mum and dad after doing something wrong. If anything, consider this more of a reassuring chinwag with a mate of yours. Oh god, I've set that expectation on myself. Hey, now I've got to live up to it. Anyway, look, tangents aside, there's no denying, folks, that in light of the Battlefield 6 beta, we've certainly heard it all from a feedback perspective. If you ventured onto the Battlefield subreddit over the course of the beta in particular, or you're a regular there, man, you would almost get the impression that Battlefield 6 was in absolute shambles. I think most in the broader community would tell you otherwise, but that's certainly not the picture that was drawn for us over on that subreddit. And look, don't get me wrong, I'm all for people having the means and the outlets to share their feedback. I mean, that is the whole point of a beta, isn't it? People didn't like what they saw, and they made that clear. Amazing. Happy days. Job done. However, while I'm all for respecting subjective takes and opinions, I'm also a sucker for ensuring that such claims come from a base of evidence. Because while subjectivity is always going to be found in feedback, if this is the feedback that it's going to be considered by DICE for implementation into the game, then it kind of needs to be feedback that's accurate, based in some form of truth. Otherwise, we run the really big risk of making uninformed decisions. And a big part of the, I'm just going to say it for the lack of a better term here, doom posting on Reddit was about the maps, more specifically the sizes of the maps, with many of the community actually pressing that the size of the map were too small to be quote-unquote true Battlefield maps, instead being more akin to the likes of Call of Duty by comparison. Now, before we go any further here, folks, I will agree with you all on the sense that on a surface level, yeah, the maps that were offered up in the beta were obviously a touch small against the standards set by the rest of the series. Even Liberation Peak, a map that features all of the vehicle classes in the game and tries to replicate that feeling of being Battlefield's true, large-scale, all-out warfare style, yeah, it felt a bit small for what you would expect out of such a map. Further to that, we also got Iberian Offensive, Cairo, and State Empire, all of which were maps that were urban in design, held very little or at times no vehicle gameplay, and were incredibly fast-paced. So yeah, the visceral reaction I saw was fair on the surface level. But do we really need to sound the alarm bells? Is Battlefield trying to cater too much to the Call of Duty crowd, or is this part of building a all-inclusive package? Now, to answer that question, folks, I want to start off by transporting us back to 2011, with the launch of none other than the Battlefield 3 open beta. Some of you may remember it like it was yesterday. Some of you, and this makes me feel very old saying this out loud, might not have even laid your hands on your first gaming device at this point. Anyways, Battlefield 3's open beta chose a very spicy map to run as its testing grounds for its first appearance to the public. Do you remember? Or can you guess what it was? It was none other than Operation Metro, folks. A map that couldn't have been further from the classic Battlefield experience. A linear, close quarters, infantry-only experience. And it was what DICE chose to use as the first impression for their next big Battlefield game. Seems a bit counterintuitive, hey? Almost as counterintuitive as to what they've done here with Battlefield 6, putting a lot of their smaller scale maps at the forefront of the first impression. Until you remember one key thing. The point of a beta is to test stuff, to get as much data on stuff as humanly possible, to put your game through the absolute ringer, to test its stability, to test for bugs, and to test for imbalances in your current weaponry design. And the most efficient way to do that is to funnel your players into as much action as possible to ensure that, well, there's actually data and stuff coming out of the game. Unfortunately, folks, stress testing content and your game isn't going to be done as efficiently on a larger map as it would be on the absolute meat grinders that are the maps that we got in the Battlefield 6 open beta. I think we can all somewhat agree that's accurate, right? Like, sprinting mechanics are pretty hard to fuck up in a game nowadays, so there's absolutely no reason for the developers to test what sprinting between large open fields looks like, because that's already been achieved in the internal playtest tests, and it's been crossed off the list. That's something for QA to handle. There is no rationale for stress testing that with the public ahead of the launch. So I think for one, that's a big reason as to why we got the experiences that we did in this beta. But I also understand that's not much comfort for those who still do have very valid concerns around the map sizes that will be launching in Battlefield 6. And this is where I want to shine some light on a couple of things here. On one, the collection of launch maps that we're expecting to get against a map pool from Battlefield 3, but also some of the really incredible work that the community have done to date to put some of these concerns around the map sizes to rest in a way. Firstly, let's take a look at the launch lineup of Battlefield 6 and what experiences we're expecting on each map based on the vague descriptions that we get. The spread looks a little bit something like this. There'll be 3 maps that feature a full suite of vehicles, being Liberation Peak, Mirak Valley, and Operation Firestorm. There'll be 2 maps that will feature a helicopter and ground vehicle element with supporting infantry, being Sobek City and Manhattan. There'll be another 2 maps that take on a more close quarters urban environment with ground vehicles to support, being Iberian and Cairo, and then there'll be 2 infantry-only maps, being Sanskritar and State Empire. Now, some may go, that feels a bit light on for a Battlefield game in the helicopter and jet department, but let's take a look at Battlefield 3 for comparison's sake. Battlefield 3's launch roster featured 4 maps, which featured the full suite of vehicles, being Caspian Border, Karg Island, Noshaar Canals, and Operation Firestorm, with Noshaar Canals being a relatively small map to feature jet gameplay. 1 map, which only supported heli and ground vehicle combinations, being Damavan Peak, but let's be honest, the helicopters were supportive in nature at absolute best for the Conquest mode in particular. There were 3 maps that took on an urban design with supporting ground vehicles, being Grand Bazaar, Tehran Highway, and Sign Crossing, with Tehran Highway being a little bit bigger than the other 2, and of course 1 infantry-only map being Metro. Now, you take that comparison, the only shift that we're seeing here between Battlefield 3 and 6 is the addition of an extra infantry map and the removal of 1 map for our jet enjoyers in the mix. It's a more even spread across the experiences that Battlefield can offer, which, yes, might be a touch frustrating for my jet enthusiasts out there, but what we are seeing here is DICE taking the Battlefield 3 approach, wherein which Battlefield is no longer just about the big, large-scale maps only. It's essentially trying to expand its offering by taking its great core gunplay, squad play, destruction, all that, and applying it to more theaters of war. Now yes, traditionally Battlefield is focused on the larger, expansive play spaces that accommodate that intense, large-scale war and that sense of it, but Battlefield, as has been proven by Battlefield 3, also really shines when the experience is supported by gritty, close-quarters action for us to sink our teeth into as well. Battlefield 3's range of expansion packs also really lent into all sides of the game and gave us, in my opinion, one of the most diverse map pools that we've ever seen in a first-person shooter game for a very long time. That really helped to give the game an insane amount of lifetime, and I think that's the direction we're seeing DICE go here as well. They understand that Battlefield 6 has a real chance to reach a much wider range of players this time around, especially with Call of Duty in particular, not exactly putting its best foot forward this time around. It would be really silly of DICE to not lean and try and capture the attention of a broader audience. Battlefield is one of the better FPS franchises out there when it's done right. The prospect of more people coming to this franchise really excites me as well, and showcasing what the franchise can do across multiple map types is the right move here in my opinion. And given the first leaks that we're seeing now about the post-release maps as well also tend to lean into the larger play spaces, it sounds like we aren't going to have to wait too long to get more maps that lean into the, quote-unquote traditional Battlefield experience too. But of course, the presence of vehicle types isn't the only metric as to whether a Battlefield map feels like a Battlefield map as well. I know a lot of people have been really concerned about the sizes of the maps regardless, because we all know that Liberation Peak, despite having so many bloody vehicles on it, feels quite small. And this is now the point in time where I want to draw some attention to some really interesting things that certain members of the community have been posting over on that subreddit. A user by the name of Major Leah did a really great breakdown where they jumped into Battlefield 4 with a PLD rangefinder, measured the maps in that game, and then measured the Battlefield 6 maps with the HUD using the distance to objective measurements, and then drew up a 1 meter to 2 pixel scaling sort of comparison to get an accurate representation of how the map sizes were differing between the two games. And these were the key standouts of the findings for me. Liberation Peak and Siege of of Shanghai are actually similar in size to each other. The big difference here, of course, is that Shanghai has the water area that is playable space and more verticality, but the two maps share somewhat similar layouts when you look at them. Zavod 311, on the other hand, is about 50 to 80% bigger than Liberation Peak, and Caspian Border completely dwarfs it. But that really surprises no one. As we said before, and I just want to draw attention to this again actually, if you take a look at Liberation Peak from a top-down view and ignore all of the geographical features, it actually shares a pretty similar layout to that of Siege of Shanghai, minus the water area. More on that in a jiffy though. Moving on to Cairo, it's actually of similar size to Pearl Market from Battlefield 4, which I found very interesting. On top of that, Cairo actually shares the same objective layout as Dawnbreaker, but is obviously way more dense in its layout. And like the Liberation Peak and Shanghai comparison, there's way less verticality on Cairo by comparison. Iberian Offensive is approximately the same size as Operation Lockers from a length perspective, but obviously features way more player area and is far less funneled by comparison. State Empire was also thrown into this comparison as well, and look, there's actually no denying it. This is an insanely small map here, and this comparison just further illustrates that. So this is some very important work by Major Leah that actually contextualizes the scale of some of these maps against the other games that are out there. But what we can also do from here is now jump on over to some of the work that's been done by Once I Was RBS, Embarrass Bad 5386, and Happy Suffragee, and use it to now cross-reference that information to just how big the maps are of Battlefield 6 in the grand scheme of things of the franchise. Now, going off of the size comparison from Major Leah with Liberation Peak and Siege of Shanghai, that places Liberation Peak all the way down here on the list of map sizes from a Battlefield game's perspective. That is, yes, pretty bloody small for a map that includes all vehicle types in the game. Iberian Offensive, being of similar size to Locker, actually makes this map bigger than Grand Bazaar and Sign Crossing, which I think are probably the most comparable maps from the Battlefield 3 roster, which is good to see in my books. But further to that, if we turn our attention to Happy Suffragee's work, we can see that the data mined map size for Mirak Valley has it spanning approximately 0.58 kilometers squared worth of space, which lands it right up here with Caspian Border's map size. As we can see, Firestorm sits up in this range here as well. We can also see that the data mined Eastward map, which is probably around, let's say, 80% of Mirak Valley, which suggests to me it's going to sit right around the Karg Island or Gulf of Oman range of maps. So with all of this data and community work being done here, are the maps in Battlefield 6 trending towards the bottom of this long list of maps and their sizes? Yes, they are. Battlefield 6 is very much following in the footsteps of Battlefield 3 by downsizing maps on average by comparison to a lot of the other titles in the franchise. However, and this might be a controversial opinion here, I don't necessarily think that is the worst thing, guys. Let me explain. As per the list here, a lot of the maps that are found in older Battlefield games, such as Battlefield 2, 1942, and even 2142, tend to trend to the pointy end of this list. There's of course some exceptions here with Battlefield 5 and of course the Battlefield 3 Armored Strike DLC, but that was the entire point of that DLC and was supplementary to Battlefield 3's launch maps. But Battlefield games over the course of their lifespan have continued to refine the balance that they strike between scale and pace of action to ensure that there is room for players to breathe between fights, but also keep the action consistent. And I'll be honest guys, given that Battlefield 6 is actually one of the slowest Battlefield games that we've gotten in a while now, from a raw movement speed perspective, this is not vibes based by the way, this is fact, I am gonna say that opting to go slightly smaller here actually snags that balance of pace and downtime pretty well. And the fatigue that we were feeling here with the Battlefield 6 suite of maps in the beta was because the majority of the ones that we got were the smaller ones on the list. We are still getting some pretty sizable maps with the launch package of Battlefield 6. Mirak Valley's comparison to Caspian Border and Operation Firestorm means that we are still getting some quintessential classic Battlefield scale maps in the mix, and I also anticipate that New Sobek City is likely to be a pretty big map here too. The beta's map pool was far from the final be-all end-all for the game's map sizes, and I also fear that if you go much bigger as a core opening package to this game, when you combine that with the movement pace and the speed of the game, you're likely gonna elongate that sense of downtime to a point where you get the pace of combat in this game all wrong. Now, I also say that knowingly as somebody who enjoys faster paced first-person shooter games, but I'm also someone who admires when Battlefield games give you an element of downtime too. I will admit that. And I will admit that, especially on State Empire and Iberian, it felt like it was go time all the time. And the larger maps will be a nice change of pace from that. But there is a limit to where in which downtime becomes boredom, and Battlefield needs to tread that line very carefully. Going all out and blowing the maps out to some of the sizes that we see in Battlefield 2, 1, or 5 is an extreme that I think would actually harm the game's launch day package a bit. There's always the question of whether you should versus whether you could. And I think DICE have actually done a half decent job with that assessment here. We have seen what happens when DICE gets that assessment wrong as well. I look back to Battlefield 2042 and its map sizes. Yes, that game was trying to accommodate a much larger player count, but I think we can all agree that the map sizes in that game got the balance of action versus downtime horrifically wrong. And it's abundantly clear to me that DICE have made every effort they can to avoid making that mistake again. The community's reaction to the map sizes, I think, has been only exacerbated by Liberation Peak in particular, which, let's be honest, does not have the best map layout for a map with so many vehicles on it. The map does funnel a lot of action into very tight spaces, and it does create an absolute haven for sniper rifles, especially on a lot of the game modes. I think the issue with Liberation Peak, given that it is actually of similar size to Siege of Shanghai, is not just the size but also the layout that it offers. That exacerbates the size concerns greatly. The two kind of go hand in hand, which has only fueled the fire even more so with the community's feedback. So look, I acknowledge that I've been rambling, guys, and this video has actually turned out being a much longer conversation than I thought it was going to be, but this has been on my mind for a while now, ever since we really got through that first weekend of the open beta, and more so when State Empire came out on weekend 2, and with all of the information, leaks, and the work the community has continued to come out with in the subreddit over these maps, it's something that I have really wanted to talk about for quite some time. If anything, I wanted to provide a bit of reassurance that we are getting a good variety of maps at launch, and the variety that we're seeing is actually similar to that of Battlefield 3, which has become one of the most revered Battlefield games of all time. We're of course going to keep seeing a wider variety of content post-launch as well, and I think Eastwood, based on the leaks that we've seen here, is going to continue to lean into that variety. But I guess if anything today, I wanted to add a voice of positivity to the map discussion in Battlefield right now to try and balance things out, not just as a balancing act, but also because it's genuinely how I feel about the map offering that we are getting in Battlefield 6. But I'm also very keen to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you've made it this far into the ramble, I appreciate you guys sticking it out and vibing with me for this long. Leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it, get subscribed for more content. I'm now doing live streams here on YouTube as well as over on my Twitch channel. We're multi-streaming now, so yeah, be sure to get around for that, guys. Hope you guys can start making it to some of the streams. But until next time, folks, I will peace out, and I will see you guys all in the next one. Take care, guys. Have a good one.